Okay, we have a total of 6 requests tonight, and the main purpose of this work session is just merely to talk a little bit about what each request is actually asking of the Planning Commission and, of course, later the City Council. Yes, can't hear me? Okay, is this not working? Nope. Okay.
And we can
Check.
get some lights. Yeah.
We seem to be working now? Everybody? Okay. All right, very good. Very good. What I think I'll do is I will just go down the list of requests and sort of detail what each one is talking about. Still can't hear, huh? Okay. I guess I'll try to talk louder in the mic. Okay, we got 6 different requests, and I will cover those one by one. Can you hear me now? Sound like a Verizon commercial here. Okay, this was advertised for public hearing. It was advertised in the Daily Press on August 30th, 2019, and September 6th, 2019. This is a zoning map of the area of Legacy of Poquoson. It doesn't cover the entire Legacy project area. There is there's an area that protrudes down this way, but it is surrounded by the white properties that are zoned residential. In this case, R1. This is just an aerial view, and if you've driven by this, you already know that it's wooded currently. A few pockets of wetlands back there, but it's a number of different properties that the Big Woods has been working towards getting together. This is the approved master plan, and I thought it got rid of that italicized T, but apparently not. This is the approved master plan that went before the City Council on 8/24/2015 and was approved. What I'm going to do is I've got another master plan map that shows the area of the buffers modifications on it, and I'll turn to that right now. Okay, so before I get to the buffer modification request, there is a proffer amendment and a rezoning amendment on this as well. The proffer amendment basically, I'll have to use my pointer and stay close to the microphone here, but delays the building of the clubhouse and the pool in this area from prior to the 80th building permit for either townhome or single-family home to the 147th. Basically, in this phase 1 here, and I've got a little description of phase 1 here. That's phase 1. There's 146 units in phase 1. So that is a proffer amendment application to essentially move the clubhouse and pool from construction to prior to the 80th building permit till prior to the 147th building permit for townhomes or single-family dwellings. So that's the first request. That's proffer amendment. The second request is a rezoning amendment, and the rezoning amendment really is looking at additional architectural drawings that were not submitted the first time around. Basically, what we had the first time around, and I was trying to go to the master plan, is we had H Hunt designs for the townhomes. I looked over the application materials. Ryan was mentioned, but we never actually got anything for Ryan Homes. So that's another important part of this application is the larger variety of townhomes, if you will. Okay. Any questions from Planning Commission? I'll keep on going until you stop me.
Mike, tell me about that one again. I'm not following.
Okay.
What is the rezoning request? in very simple
Rezoning
layman
request-
terms.
The rezoning request is to add a wider variety of, it's townhomes, a wider variety of townhome designs. And you've got that in your packet, right, exactly. And you've also got an attachment two, I think it's attachment two, attachment that shows the original
Yes,
approved one.
I saw those. Okay, okay.
So that's what we're looking at with that request. Okay, then we get into the buffer modification requests. Buffer modification number one is basically. That's buffer modification number one, and the proposal is to take the buffer from 40 feet down to 10 feet in this area. Okay, now, they did get some modifications with the original approval, and essentially, what that was on the other side. One's to the rear of the city property and adjoining the properties in York County, basically substituted 40-foot backyards for the required 40-foot buffer. So it was a replacement. That's the way I think the applicant has termed it before, is that it's a replacement. These would be modifications in that we're taking a required buffer and we're shrinking it down. So, you know, it is a modification. There's still a 10-foot buffer proposed in those areas, but again, not the 40-foot, which is what the ordinance requirement is. Now-
What is the rationale from going from 40 to 10?
Well, the rationale, quite frankly, and I'm going to get into this in a public hearing, but frankly, the rationale is that by going down to 10 feet, they will save 8 lots. And that will get them closer to the original amounts that they were approved to have with the original master plan approved. Sure.
Squiggly lines, a solid red line, can you tell me what they represent, current and past, or proposal, or what are they?
That area.
I mean, that solid red line, what is that depicting? And where is the 10-foot? How does that,
The 10-foot would be,
coming in between the two?
well, yes, it would. I mean, the 10-foot would be.
Okay, so the solid line is a 40-foot buffer.
Right, yeah.
And the red squiggly line, is that, what is that? Is that
That's
area?
to denote the entire area that's incorporated in the request.
The entire request for an adjustment, is that?
Yes, that whole area right.
Outward perimeter?
On the outward perimeter.
Okay.
Okay, the second modification is a bit like the first modification, with the exception that it's in a different location, up in this area. Now, this was the modification that the applicant sought input from the economic. And it's not part of the request to me, and it's not shown here, but the EA, they actually showed a road going approximately right there across the property and access Economic Development Authority property. They own 2 properties back there. They have submitted an additional letter that basically states that they will commit to providing that street connection as part of this buffer request, if it's granted, of course. At this point, Wayne, I want to make sure that I'm saying the right thing. Mr. Moore, our city attorney, the way to make this happen would we put a condition on it, or would we actually do a proffer amendment for it? I want to make sure I've got this right.
Well, I think that the legal authority to incorporate that letter.
Gotcha. Gotcha. Okay, thank you.
I think it will clarify what the intent was.
Sure, okay. So with that letter that hopefully everybody in the planning commission got, they are basically saying that they will provide that access back to the Economic Development Authority properties, and that can be made a part of the application for buffer modification number 2.
Yeah, Wally, if I can, because before you move
Sure,
on,
sure.
I'm not trying to put things down.
Oh, no.
You said that it's, I've done master's degree courses where I haven't read this much. If I read it correctly, what it said was if they're given the 10-foot buffer, it is still up in the air as to whether that 10-foot would be deeded to a property holder or to a homeowners association. So we still really don't know who would be controlling that property.
We do not know, and that's one thing that's included in the staff reports, but no, we
But I
do
thought
not.
it was-
The word used is may. It may be put into individual lots or may not. It would be staff's interpretation, though, that if it's not going to be put in individual lots, it'd be put in some sort of common area under the administration of a homeowners association. But I'm sure the applicant can probably address that better than I can when they get a chance to speak.
I just want to make sure I had that straight in my head.
Sure.
The question I have is if that road extended into the EDA property, that would be a loss of lots, it seems to me.
Based on this diagram, yes, it'd be the loss of one lot. Now, they might be able to reconfigure the lots a little bit, to avoid that. I don't know. I think the applicants can probably speak to that better than I can. But you're right. Based on what they've got here, that road would take up one lot, at least one lot. Right.
Site plan that shows the additional 8 lots that they're talking about.
Well, this one right here, and I didn't say that before, thanks for helping me get back. That's one right there, the one we're talking about now, number 2, would save 5 lots. But no, we do not have a site plan in yet. The only site plan we've got in is for phase 1.
5 lots, but is the width changing of the lots, or how do you get 5 lots out of that by decreasing the perimeter?
What's changing is, if you have less of a buffer right there, you have.
So the lots are going to be narrower to maintain the size of square footage in each lot? Is that what I'm hearing, or I'm confused? I mean, I don't understand, just by lengthening the lot,
Okay,
you don't.
if we put the road in there, yeah, they're gonna have to make some adjustments to these lots.
Have we seen that? Have we seen a
We haven't
plat that
seen it.
shows the
No
adjustments?
site plan, we haven't seen
Oh,
any site
okay.
plan. So obviously on the site plan, they'll have to meet their criteria, which is no more. 38 single-family homes, 109 townhomes, 200 apartments, 11 cottages. I mean, we can stay on that as long as we need to. That's fine. I'm not trying to rush you.
No, I'm just trying to understand how much the configuration is going to change by looking at what I'm looking at right now. It's hard to envision where those other 5, 6, 8 lots are coming from.
Well, keep in mind, this is a drawing based upon. If it gets turned down and they have to adhere to a 40-foot buffer, what they would be looking at in order to get anything approximating the number of lots they got there,
So the buffer is not part of the lot calculation, square foot calculation, is that correct?
Their proposal is that it
Could be.
yes, ma'am.
So that 10 feet that they're requesting would be part of the,
Maybe part of the lot, or maybe. Well, that's, they're here and they're.
Okay.
I think as we get into the public hearing part of it, we should.
Point of orientation, that box on the top right, is it just a leg? Yeah,
This is a depiction of, it's kind of hard to tell here because it's blown up so.
wouldn't be physically there, the boundaries are still part of the development.
No, no, that's just an indication of what your. Street tree alignment, your setbacks, and that sort of.
Makes sense, so, thanks.
current width on those lots, Wally, on the townhouses?
Back here,
Uh-huh.
kind of hard to tell.
Like-
I'm gonna say
The current width?
it's well less than 100 feet. I'll put it that.
I mean, for
I mean,
townhouse.
I don't know exactly because I don't have a site plan, that's the
No,
problem.
but the original site plan that was submitted, is this the only site plan that's ever been submitted, I guess, is that?
Okay, for the entire project, this is what we approved. It's a master plan.
Understand. But I was just asking, do we know the lot widths for the single family and the townhouses currently as it was approved? What were the lot widths at that point in time? No? We don't know.
I mean,
I mean, width. Are they 30-foot lots? Are they 25-foot lots? Are they 20-foot
well,
lots?
I mean, if I'm pressed.
Townhouses?
Those are all single family homes. Townhouses,
That's what, single
probably
family.
no more than 25 feet.
It would be nice, I think.
Yeah, I think we're getting to that point, yeah, yeah. Sure.
Questions for the public hearing? Members of the commission, Ms. Wood, to answer your question, the lot widths were not locked in at the time of master plan approval. They were shown conceptually always with the understanding that they may vary somewhat. Where we're at right now with the phase one development plans that we submitted, the townhome lots are 20 feet. So we're looking 20-foot product on the towns. The single family lots range from 40, 45, and 50. We have just a very few 40-foot ones that we're proposing that would be for the rear loads along Legacy Boulevard. Majority of the single-family lots, front loads, which would be in phase 3, would be 45 and 50 feet with the 5-yard side yard setbacks. In terms to answer your other question, maybe provide some clarity on the issue of loss of lots versus squeezing down lots. Wally, do you have a pointer or something I can?
Yeah, it's a very faint,
That for you.
it's gonna be the top one there, yeah, it's gonna be that one, yeah. It's very faint, isn't it? It's kind of hard to.
There,
I see it
barely
barely.
caught a flash.
It's
Okay.
Yeah.
I want to hear what, if you were to, I'll go into this in my presentation, obviously, but we there was never a buffer shown, and never was one developed property, and the only two. Our assumption was always that because we were, the other properties specific language in the ordinance, we felt we needed to come by and formally clarify that. And hope was to not have a buffer, but in order to make a modification, we reason is, if you look at up in that area, again, at the top there where we join, again, I can't. Our property, we have a couple parcels there too. If you buffer in there, you can see what happens is you get into some lots of house, unless a very small house, or what we're trying to do with this buffer request is at the time was no buffer.
I have a question. What precipitated the vacation of the resource protection area that came from Oxford Run? Because in the original site plan, there was an RPA area that you had to try and accommodate. I understand that's been vacated.
Oxford Run is deemed to be impertinent to, it's a VDOT. By VDOT as an appurtenance to Victory Boulevard. It did not extend up as far as
Debatable, but I see on the original, which you had to try and negotiate for the number of lots.
It was
Yeah.
determined at the time, it was not determined at the time because it was stated at the time that that would have to be done when we looked at the actual development plans, which we have now done. Then when it's, you would then look at where it's where it discharges, you have to look at the edge of tidal influence. We've gone through a very extensive process on that.
And sir, I hate to interrupt, but just for the sake of those watching at home, would it be possible to either speak into the microphone? I know when I'm at home, thank you.
Okay, sure. Hopefully that would.
It clarifies it. I don't want to get too deep into the public hearing right now, but yes, that does clarify. Thank you. All right. Okay, so we left off at the end of buffer modification number 2, I believe. Are there any other questions about that? And just for clarification, there was an opinion written that covers the RPA issue and the ditch issue of Oxford Run. Believe there is a letter from Mr. Moore to the effect that it is a VDOT ditch. So, anyway. All right, buffer
Oh, there it is,
modification.
RPA, I see, RPA.
Buffer modification number 3. That's right in here. That's basically the commercial buildings and the parking area. I honestly don't know why this wasn't applied for earlier, because it's pretty clear that you're not going to be able to get a 40-foot buffer in there and still have that commercial building anywhere approximating the way that it looks. If you look at the streetscape, which we all know streetscapes are artist renditions, but nevertheless, you know, clearly one of the main focuses of this commercial area was to have both of the commercial buildings looking roughly the same. There's really no other place to put the parking, and looking at the overall plan here, I mean, they've got street parking, you know, for townhouses and homes all the way up in there. There's really no place else to put the parking. So what they're proposing is to go down from 40 feet down to 5 feet in this area, still having a 5-foot buffer, but not a 40-foot buffer. So that is the request in that area. The fourth request is really just a spot request. It's right in there, for about as wide as that T turnaround is. The proposal here is to go from a 40-foot buffer down to a 5. And that is to provide for that T turnaround. When the master plan was approved, there was no 40-foot buffer shown in this area. Now, on the site plan, you will note that he is showing, or the Big Woods development is showing a 40-foot buffer through there. So the impingement in the 40-foot buffer would be in this area right here. Basically, the width of the turnaround would come in to the property 35 feet into the buffer, essentially. But if you look at the master plan, it's really not in any different location than what it was shown at the first time around. That's about the only thing I'd really point out for there. Of course, I'll read out the staff reports when we get to the public hearing portion of it. But I just wanted to take some time to clarify what the requests were, and I mean, there's plenty of room for confusion on that because it's a lot. I mean, it is a lot. I'll take any questions. We can talk about whatever we need to. We may be done early. I don't know. I'll leave it up to the Planning Commission.
Molly, could I just kind of clarify what you just said, if I could borrow that thing?
Sure.
So this is the conceptual master plan that was approved by City Council for this development back in 2015. And this does not show the 40-foot buffers that would be required by our code. What they are requesting tonight, what the applicants are requesting tonight, is to reduce that required buffer to 10 feet and allow it to be incorporated into a homeowners association or into the individual private lots, I guess as some kind of an easement or some kind of a feature. However, if that request is not approved tonight, they would be required to put in a 40-foot buffer in these three areas that would, by our code, have to be a separate area that is denoted to a homeowners association, like what they have done so far for phase one.
Right.
Get that right?
I think you got that right.
Okay.
That pretty much sums it up.
That was that's shown here, where, right there, so it
There's
does.
no turnaround shown on the site plan, and we made the comment. And the reason there needs to be a turnaround is because these lots right in here don't have. Up here you have some side lots, but they also. That's why we need the turnaround right there.
That would extend into the 40-foot buffer.
Get a copy of this in our packet, because I don't remember seeing it.
Well, because we were running late, I did not have the slide in the packet at the time that Karen sent them out Friday.
potentially the turnaround could be configured the same way as the other turnaround, where it looks like to me it actually encroaches into one of the townhome lots. So it wouldn't be, why would it need to go into the buffer? I'm just
Well,
curious.
if it doesn't go into the buffer, and this is the applicant's application. Don't want to lose any more lots
Right.
than what they've already done.
Because it's been accommodated in the turnaround above it by accommodating the lot sizes. I have another question on the Tudor property. We sort of brushed over that a little bit. Potentially, is that then going to be landlocked?
Well, the Tudor property has access on Victory Boulevard.
Where?
Well, from down here.
That would be another curb cut across Victory, and we've already got an entrance for the Legacy right next to it.
You know, there's no access shown from Legacy.
I don't think there's anything in our ordinance that prohibits another curb cut for that parcel. Is there?
No, it's just a question of distance and, you know.
This entrance into Legacy is quite grand in terms of the streetscape, mountain.
It is.
It's a really attractive architectural feature and the whole thing.
It is.
With trees on either side. Parcel right next to it. That to be acquired by the property owners. Weird bump out to me.
Right,
In terms
right.
of the property acquisition.
Well, you know, keep in mind, and that's a good point. That's a good point. But keep in mind, what we're confining our talk about tonight is really just a modification request based upon what has already been approved. So, I mean, it was approved back in 2015 with that bump out there for the Tudor
I
property.
understand that, and when I read through the covenants, in terms of Legacy Development does have the right to acquire additional properties, I guess, at some point, that would have to go through the procedure of approval, but that piece concerns me on that corner.
Sure.
And if it's causing concerns, then maybe that might be final phase for acquisition.
Sure. Gotcha.
I would mention that if the developers were to pursue acquiring additional properties outside of this approved area, they would not only have to go through a new development plan, but they would also have to go through a rezoning process to enlarge the PUD area that was approved.
They'd have to activate the PUDMU in those areas. This crosshatched area, and I kind of scanned over this last time, but this may help a little bit. This sort of crosshatched area is all the areas where the PUDMU has been activated. Now, what happened in 2015 is, you know, we call it a rezoning, but really it's the activating of an overlay district, and those are the parcels covered. So, you know, when Dannon says we'd have to go through a new process for here, he's absolutely right. That would have to be included in the PUDMU area, as would, you know, this area down here, with EDA property. Let's just say Legacy buys it someday. I don't know if they will or won't, but and Legacy does own those, the Big Woods development. But again, we'd have that same process.
Just for my own clarification, I think I remember, only a few, remember correctly, PUD over eventually created for a different one for the
Yeah.
waterfront. So this is.
There is a different ordinance for the waterfront, yes.
Essentially created for the big woods. And again, if memory serves me correctly, when I look at it, it specifies this 40-foot buffer.
It does.
It does. So, I mean, if it was missed, it was there.
Okay, here's how the ordinance works, and it is a little bit confusing. Is that the 40-foot buffer is required at 8.4 or 8 dash. What the ordinance says is that it cannot be waived. Basically, the conditions are not right for it to be waived because it doesn't abut other property that's in PUDMU, and it's not developed for commercial use. And even that would require, they could reduce it, it could be reduced to 20 feet. What they're actually applying for is modifications under 8.2, which speaks to planned unit developments in general. They don't qualify for a waiver, they can get a modification. And back when this plan was approved, the original approval, which I'll go to, when it was approved, what they offered along here and here is they offered 40-foot landscaped backyards included on the property. Okay? That's what the offer was. Now, you know, you can debate whether or not that was sufficient, you know, but the decision was made, so that's done. They also got the 60-foot buffer here reduced to 25. That's of lesser consequence of our discussion tonight. But, so what we instructed them really from January 2018 on is we've instructed them what they need to do if they were entertaining this. And they thought a long time about whether or not they needed to do this, is that they would need to require for apply for a modification instead of a waiver of the buffer. And you'll notice they haven't said we don't want to give any buffer at all. It's not a complete waiver, but it's certainly a majority waiver. I mean,
It sounds to me like, since the PUD
It's
was
a majority
built for
modification.
this particular project, really trying, now we, the developers really trying to change the requirements in the code for the PUD development. Because are there any 40-foot buffers left?
The only, well, there'd be a 40-foot buffer here, and there'd be a 40-foot buffer down here. We would require a 40-foot buffer in this area, which I think with our comments on the latest submission of the site plan, we'll have a 40-foot buffer back here. But right now, they're showing one in phase one. Again, let me go. And you'll see that we have required a 40-foot buffer in there, and they have provided that 40-foot buffer on the site plan. Now, there are other comments on the site plan, but that's not one of them. Well, through here, certainly. Through here and back here, no.
I realize behind City Hall it does, I realize
Right,
that.
right. But again, he's wanting to go down to 10 feet in here, so there would not be a 40-foot buffer in there.
I understand.
Right.
It would have been. Well,
If he didn't apply for the modification, yes, right. It's difficult. It is a little difficult, and I'm not pretending it's not. You know, it's interesting that these buffers were applied for up front. I'm not sure, I wasn't here in 2015. I'm not sure what conversations took place. You know, I don't know. The applicant's given an explanation for it, and I'm sure he'll give it again as part of the public hearing. You know, it does seem interesting that we did 2 buffer modifications here, but yet we just left these areas untouched. But
Buffer modifications that were approved previously allow for 40-foot landscape backyards, which means that those backyards, for those properties abutting York County and abutting the City Hall property, have to be undeveloped. They either need to be wooded or grass. They can't be built on. And correct me if I'm wrong, but the same condition would apply to these new buffer areas in red. They would just be 10 feet instead of 40 feet.
well,
But you
actually, we
couldn't-
get a little bit more here than we actually got here because there's really no mechanism for city enforcement back there. I mean, there's really not. which is why some people might look at that and say, well, why did we give a waiver back in 2015? We are getting 10 feet that's going to go with the recorded lots, or I think the applicants said they prefer to go with recorded lots. I'll let them restate. But we are getting a little bit more here than we got there, bottom line is. That depends on how you look at it, really. And they do state that this buffer here will remain undisturbed. So the 10 feet will remain undisturbed, which is currently in trees. So, we get a few trees out of it. But again, there's not a lot of trees in a 10-foot buffer.
That was kind of part of my question, is I understand it would be understood if they should be deeded to 50, 60, 70 property owners, then you got 50, 60, 70 people you got to make sure are not disturbing it.
Correct?
It's one thing to write it down, it's another thing to make it happen.
Well, and I think you've hit the nail on the head there, because we don't enforce covenants and we don't get involved in that sort of thing. I think that, certainly I think the first property owner would tend to be more respectful of it than maybe successive property owners. I'm sure we'll get a lot of questions answered as part of the public hearing. Is there anything else in terms of fleshing out the request, though?
Wally, I do. Changing gears a little bit to request number 2, the townhome elevations. Yes. I know that you've been really thorough explaining all the buffer reduction. Mm-hmm. I don't know if you have the difference in the submitted elevation and the new submittal anywhere in this chart package that you have, but I think it would be beneficial for folks at home or in the audience to visually see the difference.
Well, it would. I regret that I do not have slides that show that. I've got it in the documents, however. I've got it, attachment 1 is basically the ones that are being submitted for tonight. Attachment 2 is the one that was approved as part of the original approval.
And then during the public hearing, that would be a good time to try to inquire about the how many of each type and the reasoning,
Yes.
front loading, back loading, all of that.
Locations
the
and
ratios.
numbers.
Okay,
And I
thank
think
you.
that's in the staff report, too, and I'll cover that when we
Thank
get
you.
to it. Quarter to 7, so we still have time. If we need to discuss anything more, we can certainly do it.
South line does not have a 40-foot buffer at all. It has no buffer, is that correct? Or am I-
That lot, that has 50-foot landscape yards. This, of course, is open space. This will be the waiver, or the modification, I'm sorry. It's called a waiver in our approval, but it was really a modification. The modification is for these areas. It's not for this area. It's where the residential lots.
I thought the solid red line was the 40-foot buffer.
Well, okay, you're on the other side now. Okay, this is what's coming to us tonight. This is already done.
But this lower line, angled lower line that goes up to a point,
Okay,
does that have any buffer on that perimeter border?
right here?
Yeah.
40-foot landscape yards.
40-foot landscape yards,
Yeah.
included in the calculation?
Yes, yes.
If you have a 40-foot buffer in your backyard, you're unable to do anything with it, is that correct? You couldn't put a shed on it, you couldn't put any kind of structure on it whatsoever, is that correct? Or is that correct? You fence it, can you fence it in?
Well,
as part of your property?
these are all really good questions. I would say with these, with the buffer as the way it is now, we would not allow anything within that 10-foot undisturbed buffer, just to be undisturbed. Now, when you talk about landscape yards, can we allow a structure to go back there? It's not very clear. It's really not very clear. I mean, I think we'd have to default to the zoning ordinance on that. That sound right, Karen? I mean,
I would kind of lean towards that wouldn't be allowed, development in that buffer wouldn't be allowed.
yeah.
No kind of structure, you mean? It would be nice to really see a site plan.
Well,
It's so conceptual that it's
Yeah.
very difficult to look at it, really see what's on the ground, or what's going to be on the ground. To me, it is.
I think Ms. Holloway makes a good point, though. If you've got a 40-foot landscape yard back here, when the site plan comes in, we'll want to take a look at that 40-foot landscape yard and how that interacts with what's proposed.
It would be nice if we had a development plan, however,
Holloway.
they've chosen to phase this, so all we have is phase one, which is the apartments, the townhomes, and the single-family homes,
That's it.
which is the area closest to Victory Boulevard. Anything beyond that, all we have is the conceptual plan.
I apologize for calling you Ms. Hollowell. I knew better than that.
I didn't even catch that, didn't pay attention.
I knew much better than that.
10-foot buffer, you better have good neighbors.
Right, well, I'm sure a few of them are out here tonight, and some will be at the city council meeting as well. Out in the yard, the audience to see exactly in particulars here, but I know Mr. White was curious about the buffer. Of course, the EDA was involved in that, in their recommendation last week, so anyway, that's where we are. Anything?
Wally, how many units are in phase one?
146 total units.
Did you bring lunch?
So there's two in this and two in phase two.
I'm trying.
Any further questions?
I just want to comment, Wally, you did a great job. I sympathize with you.
Right, still good.
But it's a lot. It's a lot. But we'll break it down.
Well,
Take a potty break.
I can use stretch break.
Because I think
All
we're
right.
about ready to call it off.